Natasha Reynolds was just 22 when she began experiencing the first signs of ovarian cancer. For a year and a half before her diagnosis, she visited her doctor almost every month. Despite her suspicions that something was seriously wrong, her concerns were repeatedly dismissed as her symptoms continued to worsen. Natasha's pain eventually became unbearable, forcing her to seek emergency help. It was only then that she was finally diagnosed with stage 1A germ cell ovarian cancer, an extremely rare form that mostly affects young people. Sadly, Natasha's story is far from unique. Across the UK, thousands of women each year are only diagnosed with ovarian cancer after reaching emergency care. Alarmingly, just 1 in 3 cases is identified at the earliest stages when treatment is most effective. Ovarian cancer claims more lives annually than all other gynecological cancers combined, yet awareness of its symptoms remains dangerously low. Nearly half of women with ovarian cancer are only taken seriously once their symptoms become so severe that they require emergency admission. Ovarian Cancer Action, the UK charity dedicated to improving outcomes for those affected, calls this a national health crisis. My name's Victoria, and I spoke with Natasha about her experience, from the first sign she noticed to the long, painful road to diagnosis and treatment. Her story is a stark reminder of how crucial it is to take women's symptoms seriously, and how many lives could be saved if ovarian cancer were detected sooner. Hi Natasha, it's so good to meet you, and thank you for taking the time to talk about such an important and personal topic. I can only imagine how difficult it must have been to go through this experience, especially at such a young age. To start at the beginning, could you tell me, when did you first notice your symptoms, and did you have a sense at the time that something more serious might be going on?
So originally, I think when my symptoms first started, I was actually studying abroad at the time, and it was really minor things like I suddenly had really bad hormonal cystic acne, and I noticed obviously that my bloating was increasing, but the more time that went on, that bloating got worse. It never went away. I would go to sleep with it, wake up with it, and then I started having heartburn, which I got occasionally before, but never so severe, never almost constant. Some nights I tried to sleep sitting up because it was that bad, and like nothing cut it really. And then I was also having to go to the toilet more often. I would have to get up midway through a lecture and go to the toilet, because at this time I was at uni, which it's not something I'd ever had to do. As time went on, I got full quicker. I couldn't finish meals anymore, and none of that was normal for me. And I knew that when the digestive symptoms started, the bloating and the start of the heartburn, I kind of thought, yeah, maybe this is related to my IBS or my endometriosis, especially the bloating. It's a very common overlapping symptom of both of them. But the longer it went on and the more severe it got, I knew that it couldn't have been that. And I started originally maybe thinking, have I developed a food allergy? But food allergy symptoms weren't stacking up with what I'd got.
So these symptoms were a mix of things that were completely new for you, like needing to pee more often and feeling full more quickly, and ones that felt more familiar, like heartburn and bloating. But even those familiar symptoms, which you might have thought were just part of your IBS or endometriosis, they were definitely more severe than usual.
Mostly, yeah. Obviously, the bloating is something that I was quite used to, but not that severe. And then the heartburn and the indigestion I've got very, very occasionally previously. So the more it happened, the more I knew that either my IBS was progressing really quickly or something else wasn't quite right, because I also had horrific fatigue. Fatigue is something that I have experienced before. Like when I was younger, I had an iron deficiency. I do struggle with my mental health. So fatigue as a whole is not something new to me, but it was almost crippling to where I didn't want to go to uni. I didn't want to do my uni work. I struggled going to work because I was a full-time student, but I also worked part-time. And then I also volunteered at the same time. So I had all this going on, and it just became increasingly difficult to live my life, at which point I started to think it can't be as simple as my IBS or my endometriosis.
How long had you been coping with these symptoms and finding it hard to keep up with your usual daily activities before you decided to see the doctor?
So the hormonal acne and the occasional but more severe bloating started when I was studying abroad, which was late 2022. I didn't really think much of it because obviously it was a new environment. There was a lot of stressors going on. But looking back on it now, and I see the pictures and stuff, I kind of think that's got to be where sort of my symptoms started. I didn't go to a GP whilst I was away. And then I came back in January 2023. Again, it was sort of a slow progression. And then I think towards the mid to the end of 2023, it got a lot worse, a lot quicker. And by sort of January 2024, I was sure that it was something else. And that's sort of January time, 2024, is where I started to really do my own research, because I'd tried different supplements. I'd tried Gaviscon and all that, and nothing was helping. So that's when I started to do my own research and sort of started to realise that all of my symptoms suggested ovarian cancer. But the only thing that didn't was obviously my age. And at the time, I didn't know that germ cell cancer even existed. And I think if I'd not done that research, and if I'd not ended up in A&E when I did, I don't know how much longer it would have progressed and how much further it would have got. And I think that's the concerning thing, knowing that by the time it was caught, my tumour was 20 centimetres. Yes, it was stage 1A, which I don't understand how, considering how large it had gotten, but how that could have potentially progressed if it had continued to not be picked up is, I think, probably what concerns me quite a lot with everything that I've gone through.
I understand that during this time, while you were going through these symptoms, you visited the doctor several times to report them. What did the doctors say to you during those visits?
It was, it'll probably just be your IBS, make sure you've got Buscopan, that sort of thing, and it'll help it out. Or it's possible that your endometriosis is growing back and that's what's causing the discomfort. And it was like that every single time. And I think throughout that whole time, I had bloods done once, but obviously they didn't do tumour markers or anything like that. It was literally, I think it was my iron levels, and obviously answers never happened because they never found what the reason was for all of it.
Do you think the doctors you saw may have avoided doing more targeted tests because they believed you were too young to have something serious such as ovarian cancer?
That one is a bit of a complicated one for me, just because the GP that I was at the time was my university GP. So the vast majority of their patients are people my age, 18 through 25. But I feel even though it's not typical, that doesn't mean it can't happen. And I think it was probably a combination of my age and thinking that they know better. And I think there's just this dismissal of women's health in general, that we're being dramatic or it could be worse. And I think those were all contributing factors as to why it took so long, and why not only when I got diagnosed, it was because of an A&E visit.
Did you ever talk to any of those health professionals that you saw about the fact that you'd done some research yourself and found that your symptoms sounded similar to those linked with ovarian cancer?
I don't think so, no. So when I went home and then ended up going to A&E, I had a conversation with my mum literally the day before and said, I'm getting concerned now because every time I go to the GP, they dismiss me. But I've been doing this research and everything is telling me that it's potentially ovarian cancer. And at that point, my mum said, you don't fit the age range, which is obviously what everyone is going to say. But if you're really concerned, as soon as you go back to uni, which was going to be like 2 days later, go back to your GP and tell that to them and see what they say. But that never happened because I got hospitalised and then I ended up having to move back home, and everything just from hospitalisation sort of just got put on pause in my life.
Would you feel comfortable sharing a bit about what happened in the time leading up to your admission to A&E with your symptoms and how you were feeling and what was going through your mind?
Weeks, days before leading up, I couldn't wear tight-fitting trousers anymore or like button closures on trousers because the pressure that it was putting on my stomach was really quite painful. And I looked pregnant. If my belly button had popped out, you'd think that's a pregnant woman. But that day, so it was mine and my partner's anniversary, and then it was my birthday the day after. We spent the day together, we went out for dinner, we went and played some darts and stuff. And then I came home and I just all of a sudden had the most severe, sudden, right-sided abdominal pain I've ever experienced in my life. I couldn't move. I was literally laid stiff, crying my eyes out in so much pain. And I thought maybe my appendix had burst or something. And so my mum said, well, why don't we call 999? And I was like, I don't want to be a burden. I don't want to call 999. So we phoned 101 and they said, a GP will call you back within 2 hours, 2.5 hours. And this was 10 o'clock at night, I think, when that phone call was made. And then 8.5 hours later, they phoned back. And I went through my symptoms with the woman on the phone and she said, it's a kidney infection. And I said, I don't think it's a kidney infection because I used to get kidney infections quite a lot when I was younger. And this is not anything like that. And she just went, oh, well, I think it's a kidney infection, so you need to go and see your GP. And at that point, I was already frustrated because I'd been waiting 8.5 hours for this phone call for them to dismiss me again. It was also my birthday at this point. And I was like, I've phoned because I can't go to my GP. I'm back at my family home. I've phoned because I don't have the choice of going to the GP. So she said, oh, well, in that case, you need to go to A&E or go to the nearest walk-in centre. So I chose to go to the walk-in centre because I thought it's going to be quicker. So I arrived literally at opening and they saw me really, really quickly. And the nurse I saw was so, so lovely. Obviously, I was really upset. I mentioned to her that I thought it was potentially ovarian cancer. And she said, well, the reason I don't think it is because most times cancer doesn't hurt. And obviously, I was in a lot of pain. And when she was touching my stomach, I was in pain. So she was sort of saying, I'm leaning towards appendicitis and I don't want to discharge you. I'd like you to go to A&E. So she phoned ahead to theatre admissions unit. And I got there at about 8:30, 9 o'clock in the morning. And I spent all day there. They did an ultrasound on my right side and only my right side. And about 6, 7 o'clock at night, they pulled me into a room and said, we've found this mass, but we think it's a cyst. But in Sheffield, the gynecology unit isn't at the same hospital A&E is. So they asked me to go to the other hospital and they would have a bed waiting for me. So we went and it was handover. It was like changeover time. So we were left sitting, waiting for ages. And obviously I'm so frustrated. I'm so tired. I've not eaten all day. It's my birthday. I've not been able to do anything I wanted to do. And I don't know what my mum said to the sisters on the ward, but I suspect it was basically like, if she gets any worse, we'll bring her back straight away, but can she come back in the morning? So somehow they agreed to that. And then I went back first thing the next day. So at this point, it's been like a 72-hour ordeal. For context, because of my endometriosis, I've had 2 laparoscopic surgeries previously, both with different doctors, but the doctor that I saw on the ward was the gynecologist that did my second laparoscopy. So I knew him professionally quite well, and I felt like he would know my case. And he said to me, categorically, this is a cyst. 100%, I'm certain it's a cyst. So we'll discharge you and get you scheduled for routine surgery based on an ultrasound. And then they did my bloods. And about 2 weeks later, I was in the shower and I got a no caller ID call on my phone, and I just had this gut feeling that I needed to answer it. So I did, and it was the gynecologist, and all he said was, I'm transferring your case to gynecological oncology. And then he put the phone down.
And as someone who isn't a health professional, did you know what that term meant when you heard it, that he was talking about cancers of the female reproductive system?
Yeah.
What if you hadn't known what it meant?
Exactly. But then that left me in a situation where then I had to tell everyone. I was home alone. My boyfriend was at work. My parents were out. I called my boyfriend, literally crying my eyes out. I didn't want to ring my parents and say, come home immediately, because I didn't want to scare them. So by the time my parents got home, I'd already told my boyfriend. My parents literally walked through the door and I had to tell them. And I think the way all of that was handled from start to finish, it should have never, ever gone like that. And for me, once I'd had those initial tears, I kind of just felt a bit numb, because after so long, yes, I was being listened to, but it should have never happened like that. And then there was the kind of relief that I felt that maybe now I'm actually going to see the right people, because what they also didn't do originally was scan my entire abdomen. They only scanned my right side. So to this day, we still don't know what caused that pain. It was probably one of two things. It was either a bleed into what obviously I now know was the tumour, but at the time they said it was a cyst. So it may have been a bleed into it, or it was an ovarian torsion, where obviously because the tumour was so large and so weighty, it twisted, but then twisted back again, because I did have 2 waves of this pain that was 10 out of 10. So to this day, we still don't know what caused that. And then when I finally saw the oncology doctors, I had a full ultrasound across my abdomen, internal, external. I had CT and MRI, and they found a cyst on my left side. So at this point, we now know that they're pretty sure that I have a tumour on my right side, but we now know I have a cyst on my left. And this cyst was 14 centimetres. In total, I've got 34 centimetres of stuff that shouldn't be there. And at no point other than my hospitalisation and like visit to the walk-in centre, up until that point, nobody put hands on my stomach to feel it. And it was so large that you could feel it. And even when I was going to the doctors, I was showing them my bloated stomach and being like, this isn't normal for me. I was showing them pictures and it was still, oh, well, this is your new normal. This is a progression, basically, of what you've got. And then to find out that actually my tumour was 20 centimetres, I just feel like there is literally no way that if they'd felt my stomach, they wouldn't have picked up on that. What I struggle with most about my whole journey is the way I was diagnosed. Because as soon as I got to see the right people, it's been amazing. The doctors I've had have been lovely. The special nurses I've had have been lovely. And then I've also had Teenage Cancer Trust who have helped supported me because they go up to 25 and they have been so incredible. It's just that lead up to it that sort of destroyed everything for me. I shouldn't have had to go so many times. And, with Jess's law coming in, that is hopefully going to prevent that in the fact that it's 3 strikes and then they reevaluate. But that is still relying on them to reevaluate. I went so long and they never did. So I would like to think that maybe now they will. And that's why I want to speak out, because I want people to have the confidence in knowing what's normal for them and what isn't, but also for professionals to take a step back and think what could have been done differently and keep that in the backs of their minds.
What impact has this whole experience had on you physically and emotionally, and how has it affected your family?
In terms of processing, I'd already come to terms with it. It was now I was being proven right. I was obviously originally upset and really angry, and I'm still angry because I think most people would be given the circumstance. But I think for everyone else in my life, it was harder to process because I'd sort of kept those fears to myself the whole time. And so for everyone else, it was this sudden thing that this person now has cancer. It has definitely left me with quite bad health anxiety because I've now had 2 surgeries because of it. So I had my surgery last year and then I had a surgery this year. The surgery I had last year, they gave me a choice. They were very confident that my right side was a tumour, but they weren't sure on the left as to whether it was a cyst or a tumour. They gave me the choice and said, we can go in and take everything so you're not going to have issues again, or we can take your tumour. They actually ended up having to take the ovary and fallopian tube because it was so entwined. It was basically just one big mass. A, if the cyst progresses, or B, if we biopsy the cyst and find out it's not a cyst, we will have to go back in and go through that. And that's the option I chose. So I made the choice that I would rather potentially go through this operation twice to be able to have a chance of freezing my eggs. So I had my first surgery in June 2024, where they took my tumour, my right ovary, my right fallopian tube. They drained the cyst for biopsy, and then they basically washed everything out to make sure that any cells weren't there anymore. And that biopsy came back that it was just a cyst, which meant that I could have my egg retrieval. So I had 2 rounds of egg retrieval, and then they told me that because my cyst was so large that they weren't comfortable leaving it because at this point it had already completely refilled. So they were sort of concerned that if that cyst bursts, it would do damage to the organs around it and potentially my womb and stuff like that. So I had a second surgery this year in May. In that surgery, they weren't happy with the appearance of the cyst, but it was also stuck to my ovary and my fallopian tube. So I lost those as well. So as of, October 2025, I have my womb and my cervix, but I don't have either of my ovaries or either of my fallopian tubes. So I now am on HRT. at 23 in the office because I've now graduated, I've now got a job. I go into the office and it's too hot. I'm like, we need to turn the heating off. And they're like, oh, give over, it's cold in here. And I'm like, yes, but I'm menopausal. And they all go, oh yeah, forget about that. And I think it is just one of those things that you wouldn't ever know from looking at me that this is my reality.
You've been through so much, more than most people your age could imagine. And honestly, it's hard not to wonder how different things might have been if your symptoms had been taken seriously from the start instead of being overshadowed by assumptions about your age.
Yeah, and I think throughout everything that was going on, I was still having to do uni from home. When all this happened, I was 2 months from finishing my dissertation. So that sort of got put on hold and I ended up submitting it late. But it wasn't that I could only focus on my health. I still had this thing in the back of my mind thinking, I've got this dissertation that's 75% done, but I can't bring myself to pick it up, but I need to. I struggled at the time with feeling behind, where I felt like I was 6-8 months behind where I wanted to be. And obviously I now know that it's not that deep and we all go at a different pace. But for me, knowing that I had that plan for my life, that, you know, I was going to graduate uni, I was going to have a lovely summer and then get a job. And then all of a sudden I had to move out of my uni house. I had to quit my job. I had to put my volunteering on hold. And it just felt like every shred of independence I had just gone. And I really struggled with that mentally. I mean, now, so just over a year on from my first surgery, I now work full time. I've graduated. I got a first class in my dissertation. Me and my partner we moved into our first house 2 months ago now. And so for me now, I'm like, yeah, life didn't stop. It just got put on hold. But obviously at the time, it was horrible. I just felt so defeated.
What advice would you give to other women about noticing symptoms, getting help, and being taken seriously by doctors? What would you say to someone whose concerns are being dismissed?
No matter how old you are, you've lived in your body your entire life. You understand what is normal for you. You love your body, you nurture it, it does the same to you. And you ultimately know, for the most part, when something isn't right, when your normal changes, there needs to be some investigation. I had germ cell cancer, which is significantly rarer. I think it's 2% of all ovarian cancers a year is germ cell. But just because it's rare doesn't mean it doesn't happen. It's rare because it does happen. I went to a think group recently in Sheffield and it was with South Yorkshire and Basset Law Stands Up, and it's to do with cancer awareness in South Yorkshire and Basset Law. So I went to a think group with other young people who have had cancer, with professionals in Sheffield who, you know, work with young people with cancer, and the mayor was there. And I had a conversation with one of the quite senior oncology doctors at the Children's Hospital. Obviously, I didn't go to the Children's Hospital because I was too old for it. And one of the things that he said to me that sticks in my mind quite a lot is that for most of these GPs, they will have never seen a germ cell cancer, but that doesn't mean they never will. My symptoms were textbook ovarian cancer. Obviously, at diagnosis, it was germ cell, so my treatment path was different, but all of my symptoms added up. And I think professionals need to realise that just because they've not seen it before doesn't mean they'll never see it. And just because they've seen it once doesn't mean they'll never see it again. This is one of the good things that I'm hoping with Jess's Law, is that it will give people the agency to advocate for themselves and say, I've been 3-4 times, can we reevaluate? But also for professionals to think, this person has come back time and time again with the exact same symptoms. What have we done and what can we do differently? Those are the most important things that I want people to get out of this. When your normal has changed. I think a professional should always be very aware of that. You don't live in that person's body. You only know what they're experiencing by what they tell you. So believe them.
And lastly, how has opening up and telling your story helped you heal or make sense of what you've been through? And why do you feel it's important to speak out and let others hear about your experiences?
I've had therapy through Flynn's Barn, which is a charity that provides talking therapies for just young people that have had cancer or a serious illness. And they helped me with that sort of processing journey. But doing this has kind of solidified it in the fact that obviously I still feel frustrated. I still feel angry about what happened. But equally, that's okay. That's a rational response given everything. I think there is a certain shock factor in my story, in the fact that my tumour was so large and it was so heavy and it was undetected for so long. And I think that if that shock factor makes people remember it, it makes people research the symptoms, it makes professionals realise that just because a woman is under 45 doesn't mean that they can't have ovarian cancer.